Hello, everyone. We've got a unit test coming up for this unit, and I realize it's a busy time of year, but we need to wrap up this unit and get that final project finished. So, just a few things about this unit. We started off talking about the Haida Gwaii and about the problems that the First Nations people were experiencing on their homeland. And you had come up with a timeline of how the management of the forest changed over time. So that's one sector that you should make sure that you look over. And then that sort of brought me to this whole discussion about citizen participation and how over time we've come to realize that allowing the local people to have a say in the way that natural resources and the environment is managed has dramatically changed, where we went from basically low rungs of the ladder here up to ideally up into this sector where the citizens have a lot of control under the of the process of developing those resources. So here's a good description of all of those rungs. And we also looked at another case example. This was a bunch of surfers over in England. Essentially, water treatment plants were managed by private corporations and they were polluting the water. And so they got themselves organized, and they have some tips on how to organize yourself and your group in order to be effective at bringing about change. We followed up with the forestry discussion about looking at sort of two different regions of the world. South America, which is going under a massive deforestation situation, and although it has slowed over the years, it was sort of the worst in the early 2000s and has slowed significantly since in the 2010s. Uh, So when you look at South America, you'll notice that a lot of it is being heavily deforested in the rainforest area, but there is significant reforestation in some parts of South America, especially in Chile. We see a lot of plantations being created, which is a natural forest or habitat, but is actually just sort of a forest crop. Whereas in the United States, we see a huge increase in the amount of forests in the United States. Since a lot of this land is no longer publicly owned and is privately owned, private landowners are less inclined to conduct clear cutting on their lands, and as a result, a lot of southern United States, where there used to be a lot of deforestation, has reforested. Not to mention efforts by the U.S. government to actively replant and create natural areas again. Then we did a contrasting experiment where we looked at Canada's energy production by province, and we saw that the eastern part of Canada is very different from the western part of Canada, where the west is rich in fossil fuels, and most of their electricity is produced through fossil fuel use. The eastern part of the country, where most of the people live, it uses nuclear or hydroelectricity. Then we contrasted that with China, where we see that China is more like Western Canada, where we see most of its electricity production by coal and oil, which is fossil fuels, and a much smaller proportion through non-greenhouse gas producing sources. Obviously, the fossil fuel usage is of grave concern, not only for climate change, but also for smog, acid rain, and other related environmental issues. Whereas in Canada, our concerns are a lot different in that nuclear energy, although not renewable, doesn't produce the climate change after effects, but instead has issues regarding safety. Hydro is our biggest proportion. Conventional steam, which is basically burning fossil fuels, is a much smaller slice. So then we looked at, well, what about getting away from coal and using hydraulic fracking, which is very popular in the United States, to get natural gas. Natural gas produces a lot less greenhouse gases if you're using it to make electricity or heat homes. And what we discovered is that there are huge benefits of using fracking that helps out our planet. This is why the United States has actually been able to cut some of its greenhouse gases. However, when you look at the negative aspects, that the natural gas may not come up through the well, but actually up through the groundwater supply and contaminate it with natural gas, making your home garden hose a flamethrower. Is it really worth it? And for most of you, you decided that despite the fact that Niagara has lots of the right type of rock for fracking, that it's just not safe to be doing that type of practice. Huge piece on endangered species. First of all, we have to understand some terminology. Make sure you know these terms. And then we looked at the causes for the loss of species. So there's all sorts of causes for their decline. And we looked at some legislation that's out there to protect them. We also looked at how certain species are far more likely to go endangered than others, right down here. So species with large body sizes, species that migrate, specialized habitats, all of those things make them far more vulnerable to extinction compared to things that are small, like, for instance, a raccoon. Their populations have dramatically increased over time. They don't migrate. They can literally live anywhere. They're okay with living with humans. They don't have much of a value when it comes to their skins or their flesh. So this would be a really good test question. So it would help you demonstrate all of these things here. You should be able to label this diagram and be familiar with these terms. And then we put that all together with, well, we come up with all this protective legislation for saving endangered species, but then we look at the human aspect of things that, well, there are some societies that are heavily dependent upon hunting for whale. And they've appealed to the United Nations to be able to have the right to hunt for whale. Unfortunately, when there's a loophole like that, not all societies are going to play fair, and some societies applied to get this exemption and be allowed to hunt for whale, even though that's really not an important part of their traditional society, and the way that they hunt is very modern. They don't even hunt in their own local area, but go far abroad. Whereas if you look at some of these groups, they're literally out there in a 16-person canoe with a handheld harpoon. The entire village is pulling the whale out of the ocean, and it's a shared resource. They take one or two whales as compared to hunting for large scale or on a large scale. So those are a few tips on what you should be focusing on. Good luck with the test. If you have any questions, please send me a shout, and don't forget to sign up for the particular time of day that you'll be writing the test.